What if I told you that in the late 1940s, Soviet scientists locked 5 political prisoners in a sealed chamber for 15 days and refused to let them sleep? That they pumped in a powerful stimulant gas designed to keep the subjects awake indefinitely, monitoring their every word, every breath, and waiting for them to see what would happen to the mind when it was completely deprived of rest. Now, this is the center of the story known as the Russian sleep experiment, and it's been shared across forums, blogs, YouTube narrations, Reddit threads, even used as inspiration for short films and indie horror games. And for over a decade, it has remained one of the most iconic creepypasta stories, a type of online urban legend crafted to disturb us. For a while, many readers thought it was real. The story was presented as a declassified document. It was clinical, detached, and written in the tone of someone reporting facts instead of inventing fiction. Now, it doesn't name its author. It uses just enough historical references like Cold War-era Soviet science, secret experiments, military oversight. It just gave it a layer of the unsettling premise that this could be real. And it feels like a leaked government file. The story first surfaced online in 2010 on the creepypasta wiki, posted by a user named Orange Soda. And like many creepypasta stories, it was anonymous, freely shared, and never intended to be a part of the public record. But it caught on, right in the era where my interest in internet stories was at its peak. In this episode, we're going to be exploring the full story of the Russian sleep experiment after many email requests, comments, and DMs. I'll tell you where it came from, how it spread, and what real science says about its disturbing claims. Also, what makes this particular horror story endure so long after its first telling. So let's begin. And just a heads up, this episode is pretty graphic. It's fiction, but it's still pretty graphic, so if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, please take care while listening to this story. My name is Edwin, and here's a horror story. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake. That way the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. Now, this was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books and cots to sleep on, but no bedding, as well as running water, a toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 of them for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised, falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past. The general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were, and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering into the microphones and the one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think that they would win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight, at which point he continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior was how the other captives reacted to it, or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering into the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering into the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be occurring with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would continue to consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used an intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the people they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced,
"We are opening the chamber to test the microphones.
Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot."
Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom."
To their surprise, they heard a calm voice respond in a single phrase.
"We no longer want to be freed."
Debate broke out amongst the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight of the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately, voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for life of loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was open and the soldiers were sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them were in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subject's thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking it and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the rib cage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact, but had been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still, many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. Subjects themselves continued to scream to be left in the chamber and begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out, and another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count the ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times a human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arms of one doctor. His heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point that there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. the two with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the three was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had triple the normal level of oxygen. The muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object for surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought out near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested, reluctantly, that they should try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should not be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad and fetched to the patient so he could write the message. It was simple. Keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced and they were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of the project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but they were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all 3 stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that, at this point, all 3 were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired to the EEG machine, most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw the man's eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep, and then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as the one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed as the remaining members of the medical research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things, not with you," he screamed at the man strapped at the table. "What are you?" he demanded. "I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven, where we cannot tread." The researcher paused and then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out.
So nearly free.
The earliest known version appeared on Creepypasta Wiki in August of 2010 without any accompanying explanation or context. That lack of framing is what made it so effective. It read like a leaked report of a suppressed government file shared anonymously online. It was long by creepypasta standards, far more detailed and structured than most, and didn't have supernatural monsters or haunted objects. Instead, it relied on something far more unsettling: the limits of the human body and the darker corners of the human mind. Not long after it was posted, the story began to spread. It showed up on Reddit's No Sleep, YouTube narrations, again horror forums, Tumblr posts, and then within a year, it had become one of the most widely shared creepypastas on the internet. Readers debated whether it could be real. Some swore it was based on a real experiment. Others claimed to have seen the photo that proved it. And that photo, the distorted humanoid figure with the pale skin, bulging eyes, and twisted grin, became permanently linked to the story. It was usually presented without explanation, and if you want to look for it, it's called Spazm, SPAZM, .png. That's what it's usually labeled as, and it's supposed to show one of the surviving test subjects. In reality, though, that image is of a Halloween prop. It's a mannequin designed for a horror attraction, not an actual photograph of a medical experiment. But it served its purpose. It made the fiction feel like fact. This kind of digital myth-making isn't unique to the Russian sleep experiment. Stories like The Slender Man, Jeff the Killer, and Ben Drowned all gained traction in similar ways. Anonymous postings, viral sharing, and just enough realism to make people question what they were reading. Now, what sets the Russian sleep experiment apart is how effectively it mimics official language. It uses all these medical terms, military structure, and psychological concepts with just enough plausibility. It's going to draw readers in. It also avoids a clear narrative voice, just cold, procedural horror. It plays on our fear of what institutions are capable of when they operate in secrecy. And it echoes real-world atrocities like Project MKUltra, the CIA's mind control experiments, or the war crimes committed by Unit 731, a covert Japanese biological warfare unit during World War II. It feels like it could be true. Let's step back from the horror for a moment and ask a simple question. What actually happens to the human body and mind when we don't sleep? In reality, the effects of sleep deprivation are well documented. Scientists have actually studied it for decades. And while no one has ever tried to keep people awake for 30 days under gas and military supervision, we do know what happens to the brain when it's deprived of rest for even a short amount of time. After just 24 hours without sleep, most people experience reduced concentration, irritability, slower reaction times, and impaired judgment. It becomes harder to process information or make decisions. You feel foggy, emotionally unstable, and drained. After 48 to 72 hours, the effects become more severe. People begin to experience microsleeps, brief involuntary lapses in consciousness that last just a few seconds. The brain is so desperate for rest that it shuts down small sections of itself while the rest of you remains awake. Now, by the third day, hallucinations often begin. Some people report seeing shadows moving at the edge of their vision, hearing phantom sounds, or feeling like the surroundings are shifting. Mood swings become extreme, and logic breaks down. By the fourth or fifth day, the brain may start to lose its grip on reality entirely. Paranoia, delusions, and full-blown psychosis can emerge. People begin to misinterpret events and perceive threats where none exist. They may become more aggressive, unpredictable, or dissociative. In extreme cases, prolonged sleep deprivation has been used as a form of torture. It disorients, destabilizes, and eventually breaks down the ability to resist. But even under those conditions, what happens is psychological collapse, not supernatural transformation. The longest scientifically documented period a person has voluntarily stayed awake is 11 days or 264 hours. That record belongs to Randy Gardner, a high school student who did it in 1964 as part of a science fair experiment. By the end, he was mentally and physically impaired, experiencing hallucinations, memory lapses, and slurred speech, but he made a full recovery after sleeping. There is no known case in medical history of someone remaining awake for 15 or 30 days and surviving in any functional state. The body simply would not allow it. What about the story's more grotesque claims, right? Like people ripping out their own organs or continuing to function after their heart has stopped? Well, those are just medically impossible. The story's portrayal of people immune to anesthesia or screaming minutes after death crosses the line into body horror, a deliberate exaggeration designed to disturb and not really inform. Sleep is one of the most essential, vulnerable parts of human life. We spend nearly a third of our lives unconscious, unguarded, and unaware. And the idea that something, anything, could interfere with that cycle and could trap us in our own waking nightmare is terrifying. The story takes that fear and magnifies it. It shows us what might happen if the mind was stretched past that breaking point. And it says, this is what's hiding beneath the surface of your consciousness. Just you without sleep, sanity, or limits. The Russian sleep experiment is just a horror story about unethical scientific trials gone terribly wrong. But beneath that gore and the gas, it's doing something more deliberate. It's exploring a set of psychological and philosophical fears that have haunted humanity long before the internet gave them form. So here are two themes, right? Let's start with the central one, madness. What makes part of the story terrifying is the sense that people inside the chamber have lost their minds. And worse, they know it. And they don't fight to escape, they fight to stay awake. And when given the chance to be freed, they say no. This is completely opposite to what we're used to. Normally a victim wants to survive, to escape the threat. But here the threat becomes sleep itself, the one thing we all need to survive. So that reversal is very unsettling. That second major theme is control, or the loss of it. The prisoners agree to the experiment because they've been promised freedom. But it's a false promise, right? From the beginning, they are being controlled by the researchers, the gas, the confinement, and eventually by their own unraveling minds. Even the researchers lose control. They set the conditions, they oversee the experiment, but as things are going wrong, they're powerless to stop it. Their protocols fail, and their moral boundaries collapse. By the end, they're just as complicit as the gas that broke the subjects down. I don't know about you, but the part about the last subject that is asked about what he is, and he says, we are you, we are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. It just brought me back to when I first heard it. Now, that feeling that something's off, not because it's completely different or impossible, but because it's almost normal, like a warped mirror of what we recognize. It's what we call the uncanny, and that it's in ourselves basically in this story. What scared me the most was the way consciousness becomes its own enemy. and the way the human need to stay alive becomes a compulsion that destroys the self. Now, that's the horror that is always capable inside of all of us. That mindset is the scariest part. Now, more than a decade after it first appeared online, the Russian sleep experiment is still one of the most well-known creepypastas in existence. And unlike many viral stories that burn out quickly, this one has stuck around. It continues to resurface in new forms, new platforms, shared by new generations of readers who often encounter it with the same question: is this real? Is it the first time you hear about it? Now, I like to think of the Russian sleep experiment as a modern myth. Like the urban legends that came before it, stories of vanishing hitchhikers, cursed videotapes, shadowy government programs, it plays on anxieties we don't always talk about out loud. It asks, what are the limits of the human mind? And what happens when we stop sleeping, stop dreaming, stop resting, and start unraveling? Is it that inside of each of us is something darker? Something desperate to emerge? Is it something that only silence, sedation, or sleep keeps buried? And that's why no matter how many times we remind ourselves that it's just a story, we can't quite let it go. Because deep down, part of us still wonders, what if it isn't? This episode of Horror Story was researched and written by me, Edwin Covarrubias, based on requests from our Horror Story listeners. Now, let me know what you thought about it by sending me a message through horrorstory.com or in the contact information in the description of this episode. Also, thank you for your support for our previous episode, How Governments Disappear Humans. It was a very tough episode to come up with all the research and finding out about all these atrocities that are happening. And it became even worse once I started comparing all of the patterns. But we'll leave it at that. And if you have comments or if there's something you want to talk about, please email me, edwin@scarystory.com. Anyway, thank you very much for listening and for your support. Keep it scary, everyone. See you soon.